Hello guys, and welcome to Chapter 3 of the Production Pipelines training series. We're back here discussing Cinema 4D-to-A, and where we left off was with the Arnold lights and how to get our character to start showing up. But she's currently just using a default kind of sort of built-in Arnold shader, and none of her materials here are translating. And C4D-to-A doesn't really translate Cinema 4D materials at all. And as we start to add Arnold materials over here, we're going to start to notice that it's going to get gray here, and then we're going to start to see some visualization over here. So they kind of just are going to swap places a little bit here. But anyway, let's go ahead and do some cleanup on our scene. So as a part of that whole production pipeline thing, part of it is organization in your Windows Explorer. The other part is organization in your scenes. And with Arnold, I found that the XREFs don't really work at all. So what I like to do is I like to copy my character in its entirety, really, to another folder. So if I'm working on a scene for a character, and it's going to be like a new shot or a new scene, I will create a new folder for that scene. And then what I'll do is I'll just copy over basically the asset and all of its textures. And this will get into naming conventions. I really like my naming conventions to be right for my textures. That way I can tell the difference between one texture for like a whole city and one texture for like her. In the scenes themselves, the layers make it into the combined scene as well. So it's nice to be able to tell which materials are her materials and which materials are the scene materials, or which materials are another character's materials. And so I usually start my Cinema 4D scenes by going ahead and creating a number of different layers to help me kind of sort of categorize the character. That way, if this character gets imported into another scene, she or he will have, I'll be able to easily see, you know, which layers are related to that character and which layers are related to some other character. So over here, I'm naming some layers here, and I've got my objects to hide layer is going to be stuff that I've used to construct the character, stuff that doesn't really need to exist, or just doesn't need to be seen in the render. And this stuff I can just go right click and I can go to select from layer. Yeah, right here, select from layer. And then I can basically delete all that stuff in another scene usually, because it's stuff that I'm probably not going to delete. It's just construction history, manual construction history. Testa mats is going to be all of her materials. So I'm just going to go ahead and take all of her materials. I'm going to drag them into Testa mats. And you'll notice something that happens over here in the material manager. You'll get a layer here called Testa materials, and then you'll get like a no layer area here, and this is going to be all the materials that aren't under any layers. So as you start to get different characters and stuff in the scene, you can just go through these tabs and just go to each person's materials and be able to change out and switch and figure things out for different characters, which is really great. All right. The meshes for Testa will be all of these right here. Then we're going to go copy those into Testa's meshes. That way we can turn off the visibility for those at will as we want. That way if we have multiple objects in the scene, it's very easy for us to isolate different characters. We will take her bones from her skeleton, and we'll also put those into their own layer. And that way we can hide all that junk and we can concentrate just on our controls, which is really great. We could even create a layer called Testa's controls if we wanted to as well, and isolate that. And so this is kind of the de facto layering scheme I like to work with. I'll add more layers as I need to, but for the most part, these are kind of like the most important ones. All right, so let's go ahead and texture something. So with her skin foot selected, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and, well, not with it selected. We can do this without anything being selected, but let's go ahead and create a Arnold standard shader. And let's go ahead and place it under test of materials. Let's get rid of the one that already exists here. We don't need it anymore. And let's get into naming conventions here. So this is going to be her limbs, and it's going to be everything related to her limbs. So we should probably go ahead and rename this to Testa limbs material. And my naming convention would be mat at the end for material, what the object is, what the material is doing, and then the name of the character at the front is what I like to name things for, and just keeps everything really organized. So if you've got a character called Excelsior, you could tell that if it was Excelsior limbs material, you would be able to tell that okay, that's the limbs material for Excelsior versus the limbs material for Testa. All right, and so what we can do is we can go ahead and do a manual translation here, which is one of the unfortunate things about C4DtoA. A lot of the other external renderers have a built-in kind of sort of conversion tool, but because C4DtoA's material system is so vastly different from anything that's in Cinema 4D, you kind of have to build your materials from scratch, but it actually gives you a lot of control and a lot of understanding of your textures, and oftentimes you can build a shader network much better by doing it this way than from having the materials automatically converted for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our limbs here. Let's go ahead and hunt those down. So it's going to be skin foot. And let's see, we've got some color, right? And it's going to be Rykiera limbs JPEG. We've got some specular limbs S. We've got some bump. Yeah. So that's what we've got here. So first of all, we know that this character is called Testa. So we probably, in our texture folder, should probably name our textures a little bit better so that we know that these textures are related to this character. That way, if there are a whole bunch of them in a master scene of some sort, a scene where there's like 5 characters from this story and she's one of them, and we need to go edit one of their textures or do some sort of animated thing in one of their textures, we know what texture we're looking at. So we know that this material here is actually the diffuse color or the base color of the character. So it would behoove us to go ahead and name this material Testa limbs and give it a naming convention that defines what channel that it's being used for. So in this particular case, this is a diffuse color. So for that, I like to put diffuse down. And this is my common naming convention. So the channel is going to be a 4-letter abbreviation for whatever channel defines that character. So for the torso, it's going to be Testa torso diffuse. All right, and so forth and so on. Now, we have quite a few Rykieras here, right? Yeah. So what we would like to do really is we would like to actually take Rykiera and replace it with Testa. And a great way to do that would be to get out of that folder, go back to where it just says text right here, the actual folder itself, right click, and if you happen to have Bridge installed, it actually has a link here in the right click menu for Browse and Bridge, and it only comes up if you're on a folder. So if we do a Browse and Bridge, we'll be able to browse the text folder in Bridge. And what we can do is we can actually grab everything, and we can do a Control-Shift-R, or we can come up here and do batch rename, which is Control-Shift-R. Alright, and so what we can do in here is we can go ahead and rename stuff. And so what we want to do is we want to take a string substitution. So we want to take the original file name, and we want to get rid of this one here. So we only want this rule here. And what we want to do is we want to take Rykiera, like so, and we want to replace it with Testa, all lowercase. And we can go ahead and rename. And that's just going to go through, and anywhere where there's a Rykiera, it's going to go ahead and replace it with Testa. And so just that quickly, we've renamed all those textures and taken care of that. Now we have to come back in, and of course we have to add in the correct channels here. So this is going to be the diffuse, or the base color for her face. This here is going to be the bump map. So the 4-letter abbreviation for that actually happens to just be bump. For the specular, that's spec. So I like to do that. The lashes are interesting. This is actually a opacity map. So I like to do opaque for that. Or an alpha. You could put alpha there as well. But because Arnold deals with opacity as the alpha, I like to use opaque for that. Testa's eyes are going to be a diffuse. She's got a bump on her eyes as well. That's going to be a bump channel. And so forth and so on. So I will come back after I've renamed all these. And so that takes care of the ones that I'm kind of sort of familiar with right now. Now we have a lot of others that we haven't actually renamed yet. And that's mainly because as I get to those, I'll see what they're related to, and then we'll figure out how they can be named. But anyway, coming back to the limbs material, we're going to want to apply this material to every location that has the limbs. But before we do that, we'll probably want to delete the original limbs material to make it kind of easy to figure out where we need to apply that material. And before we do that, we're going to want to look at the limbs material, and which is actually going to be skin foot here. And we're probably going to lock it down. So we can do that by using the lock icon here. And we just want to look at our different channels here and just kind of see how we can translate this. So if we double click on the limbs material, we've seen this in the last tutorial, but we have kind of sort of a base look at the standard material, and it's showing off, you know, all the different areas of what can be changed and manipulated. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to actually want to open up the network editor, and this is going to allow us to actually create our shader network. So Arnold shaders are networks, and every single one of them is really a network. And actually, you can actually create a Arnold or a shader, and you can just create a shader network that has absolutely nothing in it. And if we were to open this network editor up, we'll see that there's absolutely nothing piped into the Arnold beauty, which defines the look of the character for that particular shader. And so we could create an empty shader, or you could come in and of course you could create any number of the de facto kind of sort of node shaders that already exist in Arnold. And so typically you're going to come through and you're going to create an Arnold standard shader. That's the typical workflow. You might come in and create like a hair or a skin shader perhaps if you're looking to do hair and skin workflows. but we're going to go ahead and open up the network editor for our limbs material here. And what we want to do is if we click on the standard node, standard shader node, we'll notice that we've got all the same controls that we had down here in our material manager. Because our material manager is locked on that Cinema 4D material, we can see in comparison, you know, how this shapes up to what we've got here. And so the color channel in a Cinema 4D material is diffuse in something like Maxwell or V-Ray or some other renderers. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to pipe our limbs texture into the diffuse color in order to get a color on her. And so an easy way to do that is to go ahead over to our texture folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and grab the limbs diffuse that we just renamed, and we're just going to drag it into the network editor like so, and it'll drop the image right there into our node graph. Now we're also going to need a few more images, so let's go ahead and drag the rest of those in. We're going to need her specular eventually, so we can come over here, and I'm doing this from my second monitor, but I'm going to do it from this monitor here temporarily just to show you kind of sort of how that goes. So we can grab the limbs and just drag those over, and we can in fact grab the bump as well and drag that over as well. And that pretty much takes care of the limbs. Alright, so we've got 3 image nodes in our network editor here. And in fact, over here you've got the whole entire Arnold Shader Network tree here. And if you go under texture, besides all the AL shader nodes that are in here from the AL shaders package, you'll see that you've got a image node, an Arnold image node, which comes with some attributes such as UV coordinates, which you almost rarely are going to need to mess with. Your image attributes include the ability to load up a file for your image if you want to go that route and load up your images that way. And then the basic tab has a name, which allows you to go ahead and name your node if you so choose, which can be useful for some coding stuff if you're into that sort of thing. But that takes care of our image nodes. And so this material is pretty simple. For the most part, we're taking these basic images and they're just basically driving the coloration of their different channels. So this is a pretty simple shader in C4D. So all we need to do is just grab the output of the image, and we want it to drive something on the standard shader. So if we go ahead and drop it on this blue mark here, and it's going to show us all the things that we can pipe this into. And we're going to pipe it into the diffuse color. And that's going to get rid of the diffuse color here in the standard shader. And it's just going to leave us with only a couple of more options for the diffuse. So we can mess with the diffuse weight. This can control how diffuse our object is. At 1, basically the diffuse color from this image is going to show completely through, and a weight of 0 means that there's going to be no diffuse component to this shader, and the color is going to be black. Under the specular, one of the very interesting things about Arnold is that its specular is kind of sort of its reflection. The reflection is for very, very, very special, very, very circumstantial kind of sort of reflection effects. You almost never need to use reflection, the reflection channel in Arnold under the standard shader, because the specular pretty much is reflection. It takes care of glossy, blurry reflections as well as strong metallic reflections. Usually you'll want to turn off Fresnel for your specular in most cases. The reflectance at normal is going to control how much further into the object the Fresnel is. So a reflectance of normal 1 is pretty much kind of similar to like having no Fresnel at all. which is going to be a completely metallic object with all the reflections showing in the whole entire object. Whereas in the real world, a reflectance of normal at 0 typically means that when you're looking at the object head on, it's not very reflective, and then as you move to the edge of the object, it starts to get more and more and more specular and reflective. The roughness value controls how reflective the object is. So at a roughness of 1, you're going to have a very rough granite or plastic, or not a plastic, but well, more of a rough plastic rather than a clear coat plastic, or it's going to be like a rubber ball. And more at 0, at full of 0, it's going to be like a robot, like a transformer, or like a car. It's going to be very metallic, rough, very metallic specular. Anisotropy built in here as well, so you can have narrow specular, metallic like brushed metal type reflections. Refraction is going to control, it's going to be your glass effects. And interestingly enough, the opacity channel also controls the alpha. So this is going to be very important for our eyelashes a little bit later. Subsurface scattering is built into this material as well, and it's incredibly beautiful looking, incredibly powerful. But you would pipe a color into here. So actually, what's really great about the shader network is the fact that these shaders can be pumped into multiple channels. And so you could basically drive multiple channels in this shader with just one image, allowing you to, it's just a really convenient way of working with shaders. So we can go ahead and just drag this into here, and we can actually plug this directly into the subsurface scattering color. And if we control double click on the name here, that's just going to optimize our node here. This is based on Espresso, the Espresso system. It has nothing to do with Espresso, and in fact you can't do any Espresso type stuff in here. Its only similarity is that it's using the underlying kind of look of the Espresso system and the way that things are hooked up. And so a lot of the functionality that's similar in the Espresso system, for instance, Alt middle clicking will move around, and Alt right clicking will zoom in and out. Middle mouse will also zoom in and out. All of that functionality is the same as Espresso. Connecting the nodes is the same as well. You click on the little dot and you just drag and you just drop into whatever the input is. Or if you drag into this blue space, it'll allow you to pick an input. And so we're basically driving the subsurface scattering and the diffuse color off of the diffuse image that we have here, which is this one right here. Now the subsurface scattering has some pretty simple controls, but it looks really amazing once it's going. We can go ahead and up it a little bit to give her a little bit of subsurface scattering. And then the radius controls will just control how far the red, green, and blue channel go into the skin. So for a character like this that is that we've made real world size, I think she's like 5'7", 5'8", 5'9". We probably want the red to penetrate deeper into the skin, maybe about 3 centimeters, 2 centimeters, give or take. And then we probably want the red, the green and the blue to penetrate a lot less into her skin. And we're going to go ahead and test that with some lights a little bit later once we apply this material to her. The specular is going to get dropped into her specular color. Now, if you get a character that has like a gloss channel, and I know some DAZ characters I think do, or some other characters that you get off the internet typically have a gloss channel. The gloss channel controls the specular. If we go ahead and drag from this dot and drop here, the specular weight is typically controlled by gloss, and the specular the regular specular is controlled by the specular color is controlled by the regular specular image. That's typically how I've seen that most images work, in case you get one of those gloss channels and you're like, well, which one should I plug in here? You plug both, and one controls the weight, one controls the specular. The bump is a tricky one. What we can do is we can actually unplug the standard shader from the beauty port, and we're not going to be able to see anything but, you know, this de facto white again that we're seeing here if we do that. But in order to do the bump, what we need to do is we need to plug the standard shader into a bump node that then drives the bump over the standard, basically. So under our shader list here, bump actually appears under surface, and we need a 2D bump. So we can just go ahead and drag that from over here into our shader network, and we can go ahead and plug our bump into our beauty port. And so now we have a bump map that has a bump height of 1 centimeter. And what we can do is we can take the test the limbs bump, and we can go ahead and pipe that into the bump map. Now we need a shader, and so we can pump our shader, which is our standard shader, into the shader port. And we can do a control double click to go ahead and optimize. And if we don't like this weird kind of sort of knot thing that we've got going on, we can just grab the shader and just drag it up, and this will organize our network a little bit better. Alright, and so that's how you set up bump maps. So you would drag in a bump node and plug in the bump into the bump map, plug in the shader into the shader. This is going to define your color, it's going to define your bump, drag all that in here. And so this shader for her limbs is set up. And so what we can do now is, since we don't need this material anymore, there is one more thing though. And I noticed that her layer color happens to be peach here. So if we want to replicate this material exactly as the way it looked from DAZ, we could open up the network editor again, and what we could do is we could combine this specular color with the color that we saw in the layer color here. And the way we can do that is we can use a color node, a composite node in particular from color. And what we can do is we can combine these two based on a certain value. So something like, they're probably combined using something like either screen or multiply, more than likely. I'm just going to go ahead and screen the two together. And so this is some basic compositing stuff. If you're familiar with After Effects, most of these operations will kind of make some sense to you. You know, or if you're familiar with Photoshop, same thing. You're combining two different layers together based on a mathematical operation. And so we can actually drag the composite into the specular instead, and so it'll drive the specular. And we could take our specular image and make it B, so it's underneath, and then A could be the color. So we can go ahead and click on that, choose a screen color, and we can pick this color right here. And now we have that peach being blended with the specular image, which is then being pumped into the specular color, which in turn is being all mixed together here in the standard shader, which is then adding a bump. So as you can see, these networks allow you to get very, very complicated, and you know, while you can be very simple with them, your ability to be able to pump multiple inputs into different areas. In fact, I could pump this composite really into the shader here if I wanted to, and I could, you know, have the network go like that, or there's so many different things like you can do, or you can have like 2 different iterations, maybe, or yeah, iterations. You could have like a skin shader version of her limbs, and then you could have a standard shader version of her limbs, and you could switch between the 2, see which one renders faster, and different things like that. Gives you a lot of control over your look dev. All right. But anyway, with this shader done, we can go ahead and finally go ahead and delete the original Cinema 4D shader. And that's going to give us some question marks here. And this is great because now what we can do is we can see exactly where the limbs actually were applied on this character. And all we have to do is just go ahead and drag the Arnold materials in their place. And as we do this, if you watch the IPR, you'll notice that it'll start to, in real time, update as you move your shaders around. And eventually it'll give you a pretty accurate view of what's going on with her look. And so now we have Testa, and now she is fully textured on her legs and her hands with a subsurface scattering based material. And as I said before, we see that she's becoming a little bit more washed out over here, and she's starting to gain color over here. And it's just the nature of the beast with Arnold. Once again, it doesn't have a viewport preview, but it gives you something better. You get an actual accurate representation of what your character is going to look like at render time here. So the great thing about this is you can make changes to your shader in real time and see, you know, what your character is going to look like, and then you know that when you send this off to a render farm, you know, out in Texas or out in Japan or out in Europe somewhere, you know that the money that you're spending to get your image done is well spent, because you know that everything is perfectly correct. The animation that you did, all the volume metrics that you put into the scene, the way you made your hair, the exact width of the hair, everything is perfect. There is no confusion about whether or not something is right or whether something is wrong. And that's the true power of C4DtoA. So in the next tutorial, we're going to continue this along this path, and we're going to go ahead and continue texturing our character. We're going to look at how we're going to do the hair. It's going to be a little bit more tricky. We're going to work with the Arnold tags and be able to actually go ahead and get the hair done. And then we'll see how we can rename some of these objects that we're a little bit confused about. So see you guys in the next one.